Hello, everybody. Welcome to Raising Vibrations. You're with Simon today. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at Saturn direct. And this actually occurred for us on the 20th of September, 2019. So I'm really excited to do this video. I think there's a tremendous amount of interest and excitement that I have in sharing what it is that I perceive or see. And I hope that on some level, this conversation today kind of develops some value into your life. And it also helps you at another level process the nature of reality as it is at the moment. You know, it's really interesting to me to see the world and to see the context of what is occurring and how things are playing out on the world stage, and how that deeply relates to the more subtle layers of our collective psyche and the individual psyche, right? So our awareness and all the types of layerings that our awareness sort of holds within this plane of existence that we inhabit, so this we call Earth. And what is this journey that we're on, you know? And I'm intrigued by the Saturn direct movement for many reasons. And it's, to me, I think it's a really profound moment in terms of the context of this world that we are moving through, this phase of evolution that we're moving through, this kind of trajectory that we're experiencing, and how we are individually perceiving our realities, and how those realities and how we're perceiving those realities are influenced so much by the kind of technological advancements that we have at the moment. So like Facebook, for instance, being a prime place for where everybody, you know, receives to a certain degree some information about the world. And one of the things that fascinates me is the level of detachments that exists between your immediate state of awareness and where you are currently in yourself, and the events that occur or the experiences that occur where the news gets generated from, and then how that gets delivered to you. There's like a sort of a distance between the two. And a lot of the time we've kind of replaced the old way of how we received news with this new format that's in existence. And one thing's really real is that we're still kind of in a place where a lot of the information that gets presented to us on our news feed, etc., or still holds a sense of, as I said, that detachment. And so, well, how do you know it's true? And that's a very scary place to kind of enter, because it means that a lot of the things that we kind of buy into as the way that we define reality, Saturn, may not actually be the way that we feel inwardly within ourselves. And there's a kind of illusion that starts to develop between the truth and the way that we actually feel about something, and our set values and our set sort of morals and ethics that we hold about ourselves. And, you know, when you look at the chart today, and I show it to you in terms of why I'm opening up with this conversation, you'll see that, you know, there's a lot of planets that are, you know, Cancer Capricorn axis, of course, a lot of planets moving into Libra in the next month or so. And the next new moon is going to be happening in Libra as well. So there's a lot of energy that is moving to a place where there's tension and squares taking place. And there's a lot of Neptune influence as well, especially with Neptune influencing Jupiter and Jupiter influencing Neptune. And that whole entire energetic dynamic of knowing what's true versus kind of imagining something, or not imagining something, maybe I'm trying to find the word for the reverse of, okay, so how could we validate something as the actual truth versus another person's perspective of it that we're sort of not discerning through, or asking the question how much of their own internal process or bias is influencing that perspective. It's super kind of fascinating to me at the deeper, subtle layers of the collective and individual levels of awareness at the moment. There's a tremendous amount of, I would say, like being unsettled and trying to find what's the truth, and also trying to gain a sense of groundedness. And I suppose this is the kind of entrance into the Saturn Direct video is, groundedness, and how do you feel grounded? I chose this imagery specifically for this because the Saturn archetype speaks to this lighthouse, okay? And the cosmos, which is essentially sitting, at the top over here, this imagery, let me just get my little cursor so that we can all see it. There's my imagery. You can see that the cosmos is this huge, vast, expansive place where our imagination and our inner sense of exploration about the nature of our existence as a human race on Earth, it's consistently being interfaced with this very microcosm level of reality that we have here, which is our bodies and the things that we as a human race develop, and the perspectives that we hold, and everything that is held within our sense of identity as a collective race. And I speak about collective race and sense of identity as well because of the planet, the nodes being in Cancer Capricorn. We are, as such, we're re-identifying ourselves. And for a great deal of time, we've had a secure sense of identity. And as that's being reshaped through these huge, massive changes that are taking place in the social landscape over the last 7-8 years, with Uranus and Aries squaring Pluto and Capricorn, it's definitely not uncommon to speak to somebody and on some level touch that part of them that feels really anxious or nervous about so much of this energy that has reshaped the way that we feel secure and understand what our life is about, and that there's so many radical changes that are occurring within us that once we sort of just thought that something was the way that it was, now becomes something that's actually nothing related to what I wanted to do, or our internal dialogue with ourselves is being reshaped. And so how do we find that center point within this huge, ever-changing sort of landscape that's so vast? It's like a chasm, right? So this lighthouse is the Saturn part. It's the part of us that really kind of brings us back to our own center. And I want to focus on that today in terms of how do we come back to the center of our own self. And it's a very important thing to contemplate at the moment. Unfortunately, my little Saturn in Capricorn, the 20th of September thing is like bled over there. Little Virgo detail for us. Okay, so here's another image that speaks such volume to me. It's just so incredibly intense in terms of the reality in which we are present with at the moment. And so much of what I'm actually talking about right now is existing in a realm that's, even though it might for many of you seem very clear in this physical world, is actually existing outside of that. So it's like the non-physical realm of reality. That's where I'm really talking at the moment. And this imagery over here just sort of screams to me so profoundly with where we are as a human race and what it feels like inside of ourselves, because of course we are an embodiment of the collective, and each of us holds within ourselves a storyline that seems to be very much about coming through this phase and shifting from the old structure to the new structure. And so every single one of us has this kind of storyline of a metamorphosis that's taking place within us. And some of us would have had the metamorphosis early on, in the 2000s, like the 2010s, 2011s, 12s. And some of us would have had one in 2016, sort of coined socially as an awakening experience. And it was kind of a breaking out of the old mold and the realization of a new entire platform of reality that seems so fresh and new, but so deeply confusing and uncertain to the psychology of your own perception of reality. And the Saturn, South Node, Pluto, all sitting in Capricorn, to me is the representation of this old structural nature that once held within it all of the traditions. So within a structure is a belief system. So look at the cross over here, like you can even perceive that as like the Celtic cross, or, you know, different forms of religion having that cross as an example being a center point within the community and within the structure of a civilization as their relationship to faith or spirituality, like a very important component to the structure of reality. And there's, you've got Jupiter sitting in Sagittarius at the moment. And you can see even that, especially, and this is what I'm going to touch on as we kind of get into the individual story of what this Saturn direct means for us. But I'm speaking more on a collective level at the moment, trying to bridge the story of what you were born into and how you came into this world, in sort of like inheriting the phase of reality shifting from what was once the structure to what is beginning to become the next structure. And so we all kind of are born into this, and we inherit the storyline. And as we inherit the storyline, it seems to me that the metamorphosis within ourselves, which can be defined as a dark night of the soul experience or an awakening moment, or the realization that, you know, all of the things that you once held as the truth no longer seem to be the truth for you anymore, as an example, or, you know, shifts in perceptions in your life, and you realize, wow, I don't want to actually be married, or I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that, I want to do that job, I want to do this, as an example. All of that framework is sort of embedded within your psychology, and whether it's Pluto and Scorpios that were born during the actual imprints where the fall is occurring, or the Pluto and Virgos, as an example, who were born into the time where the actual impulse started. And so you kind of lived in both worlds, you know, and Pluto Libras, as an example, living in a world where it's the same, like you're literally between the two. And Pluto and Leos, as an example, sort of coming into the world and establishing the order, but then realizing that part of your sort of later parts of your life are actually about the witnessing of the fracture within society and the illumination of individuality, as an example. So there's a tremendous amount of like different categories of generations, or different generations that are integrating at different times, that have different experiences of this singular process, which is essentially the change of the God, as it were. And a lot of the chaos that you see in the world at the moment is many of us, and this is my personal insight, this is not something that, like, this is me personally suggesting to any of you that understand what I'm talking about here and sense it with inside of yourself. This is my personal suggestion, is the less you become attached to the outer world circumstances and its sort of decay, and the more that you spend time coming back to the center of your own self, you will find sanity. And the more that you develop a connection to yourself, and the more that you develop that and hold that connection to your own inner awakening process and healing your own wounds and coming to a deeper sense of recognition of your own cosmic nature, you will see the outer world as the parody, as the distortion. And the more you progress into the deeper sense of self, the clearer the outer world will seem in terms of its outdatedness. And that's where you can actually find that a lot of kind of stillness and a lot of groundedness can actually occur. So I'm going to come back to what I was originally talking about here, with the structural nature of a world. And sort of here you have the centerpiece that holds the symbol. It's a symbol of the collective's attention to something that directs us, okay? And if you notice in the old world with things like a domination hierarchy, and you look at the world that was primarily organized in a way that was about will, you would see that the pyramid is a deep, profound symbol of organizing people, okay? And for those of you that know things like pyramid schemes, as an example, these are literal manifestations of of consciousness organizing people or things so there can be control. And at the top of the sort of pyramid is a set of values that we as a society adhere to or buy into or honor in that way. And there is like a magnitude of different archetypal themes that are held within, like how the society organizes the gender roles, as an example, and this type of stuff. So there's a tremendous amount of, and you know, just to go even a little bit deeper over here, like how the society forms, and I'm talking about the graveyard, what's the society relationship to the process of death and what that symbolizes or means, you know, and each culture or each society will have its own perception of that, depending on the relationship that it has to its spirituality and depending on the relationship it has to the man that stands at the top, or in more matriarchal times where the woman stands at the top. Either way, the point here is that within a structural organization that at least we have been living through for the last however long, the primary mode of that structure has been the kind of world that we see today. And what I am trying to encourage through this conversation and the realization of Saturn direct as it moves again over the south node here in Capricorn, and it moves over the Pluto, and it moves over Pluto's own south node, and it moves over its own south node, i.e. Saturn's own south node also sits here. You're going to be witnessing the subconscious collapse, or it's already in its state of collapse anyway. So it's not like the old world is already in the formation like this. This is what it already is. And we're just kind of like observing its decay. And it's already in the motion of decay. It's not something that is progressively decaying. It is already decayed. And so as the Saturn goes back over the south node, what it brings to the collective is all of the memories that are held within that time that the society was in existence. And here's the thing, that life is not simple, it's complex. And so when you have a society, a certain percentage of the people that exist within that society will buy into the society or the civilization's cosmological truth, or the ideals and sort of agendas that are held within a governmental structure. And there will be also people that will sit outside of that and say, no, we don't buy into it. And that polarity manifests this dynamic of people that are for and will hold the traditional perspective, which can be considered maybe conservative in that sense, and the people that are more progressive, that are open to change, as an example. And so within this societal structure, the people that are in alignment with their truths will find more harmony, and the people that are not in alignment with their truths will find disharmony. And so out of that dynamic manifests psychological things like, for instance, rage or resentment, or unfairness, and the need to fight the system, as it were, because their values are not aligned with those and stuff. And it's a very sort of like complex and deep and yet beautiful expression of how consciousness manifests itself through the human condition and the way that we organize ourselves. And this Uranus in Taurus over here it's in retrograde motion at the moment, but it's moving through the constellation that's bringing back to the surface, in my view, a lot of memory that was taking place when we had World War I, for instance, and World War II, because Pluto at the time was actually in Cancer. So what is the jump between what I'm sharing here and this Uranus, Pluto, Cancer stuff? Well, at the moment, and this is what I see, and I want to bring this up, is Pluto and Cancer was a period of time where what was set in motion was two structural things. One, the machine or the structural society led by people that wanted to initiate their own ideals into the world, and so becomes more sort of, I wouldn't necessarily say patriarchal, but I would say divide and conquer, as it were, like conquer other societies and sort of own them as that way. They would manifest wars, and this would be a boundary thing. So boundaries being a Capricorn dynamic, but it's the Pluto's in Cancer. And so at that time, you got a lot of societies and families where men went to war to fight for their country under the belief system or the conscription that if you did that, you were fighting for your national beliefs and truths and values. This was the pyramid. Or if you didn't, then you were either sent to jail and punished, or that you were castrated, you were weak. So there was the psychological heaviness of you needed to fight under the pyramid scheme, and under the pyramid scheme, there was no choice. And so the will for the ability for the masculine to have choice in that sense was repressed, because they knew that going to war leads to one thing. It's not like you go to war and come back and go, oh, this was, I learned a great deal. It was like such an initiation process. I was profoundly met with everything that is the spiritual nature. No, it's fear, it's destruction, it's lack of boundaries, it's absolute violations of trust, it's deep, deep psychological abuse, end of. It's destructive, and it's for power gains that are distorted and damaged. So this doesn't go away. This type of material doesn't go away. It lingers within the collective psyche and gets reborn into the genetic DNA until it's purified, which is one of the things that's arising on the planet right now, with all of these things sitting here in Pluto and in Capricorn, is the arising of all of this unresolved anger that was displaced relative to memories that are linking far beyond this moment in time. And that's why there's so much chaos on one level, because there's so much misunderstanding of how could possibly there be so much rage in something. And it's like, well, if you analyze the boundaries that were not held in place by the parents of the child, for example, because they didn't know how to do that, and you just go back to the lineage, you'll see that there's a point in which these things became apparent and real, right? That's just one example. And then we take, for instance, again, Pluto through Cancer, and it was like, okay, so what happened to the woman at the time? Their roles within the home became looking after the kids, and that was burdensome because it meant that, there wasn't the masculine form that was there to help and protect. Even though it was in some sense done in an essential way, they were still left with this intense duty, which is the most important job on the planet, was to sort of raise a family and all of the things that were associated with it. And that burdensome was too much. And so you have these natural polarities manifesting themselves where women's ability to actualize their masculine side, which was to self-actualize, became repressed, and the masculine aspect of their ability to feel their emotions was repressed. And now what you have here is a generation born where Uranus transits through Taurus, and it's absolute scarcity, right? During the time of World War I and World War II, it's just mass chaos. And then we come out of that, and then it's the Pluto and Leos. And well, you'll speak to every Pluto and Leo person, particularly Pablo Coelho, who wrote the Alchemist book. You'll hear the stories, and it's like they were told that they needed to do things that secured their safety. And the Pluto and Leos were like, no, I want to follow my purpose and dream. And so what manifests out of that whole entire thing is that. And what we're dealing with at the moment, through my perception, and I've done an intense amount of research into this kind of thing, which at some point when I've got some time, I'll put together for you guys, got to do with Chiron's relationship to Uranus and that opposition that took place and all of this type of stuff. This whole entire sort of storyline has just collectively moved with us. And progressively, we've reached this point where now we're living in a time where Pluto transits through Libra. Okay, so Pluto transits through Libra between 1971 and 1983. And there is kind of a deep spiritual awakening that starts to become more alive within that generation, as well as the Pluto and Virgos, of course, because you've got Uranus conjunct Pluto there. And I don't want to go too deep into this because there's not enough background information for everyone to make sense of. But you have Pluto and Libras, and they come onto the planets in their 30s and progressively entering their 40s, where Pluto is in Capricorn. And the purpose here is that Pluto through Cancer is a cardinal sign. Pluto through Libra is a cardinal sign. Pluto through Capricorn is a cardinal sign. And for those of you that are Pluto Libras, you'll sense it very clearly inside of yourself. There's two things that are going on. One is that one of the things that you had to clear out in your cosmic mutation story to come to the other side was how your boundaries were defined, emotional acknowledgement, and the ability to realize that there was kind of deep codependency complexes within inside of yourself. And that didn't matter which side you were. If you decided to have children, you felt the sense of like purpose and meaning, that now you've got this whole entire of like work that you need to do. And then on the other side, there's this part of you that's like, oh, I'm just discovering this new part of me, and you want to give space to that. And you're kind of caught between these two dynamics of wanting to give space of aloneness to find the thing that you love in terms of finding your own individuality. And then this other part that is sort of influenced by the conditional nature of the old world. And in those three sort of themes that are playing out over there, they impact the structure of how you see the generation of kids coming onto the planet right now. And for a lot of you that have got children, most of you will have Pluto and Sagittarius kids. But for those of you that got Pluto and Libra, Capricorn kids, one of the biggest things that you're drawn towards is making sure that they have emotional feedback that says, yes, I acknowledge your experience, not to go, let's repress what you feel because you're not an adult and it irritates me, as an example. And this is like a big thing. And what you're really actually saying underneath that is this shift within cultural norms that allows for this one-dimensional perspective to be broken down, and for there to be a kind of acceptance of all different types of expressions of reality. Like, for instance, when Pluto transited through Capricorn, I think it was in 2014 or 15 maybe, it was legalized that, gay men can get married, or two women could get married, as an example. It was like this became accepted within the social norms, which on some level is like, wow, that's progressive. But really, at the end of the day, what we're actually seeing here is the collapse of the pyramid that held the values that were very repressive and had an agenda, to something more along the lines of like, we're starting to, as that breaks down, there's more acceptance of individuality and a more acceptance of differentiation. But at the same time, and this is where this thing becomes very intense, is that as we begin to witness the reforming of the self that exists with Pluto through Capricorn, Pluto over the South Node, Saturn over the South Node, is, well, now what we've got here is, on one side, people that are still entrenched in the old world because it's familiar, as in conservative, holding on to that. And then you have people on the other side that are deeply wounded by the repressive nature of that structure. And that's why I'm saying that it's my internal subjective perception that at the time there are two forces, and this is where everything becomes Libra orientated. Can you see the squares that are occurring here with Libra? Venus sitting in 8 degrees in Libra, it's squaring the nodal axis. And for most of you Pluto Libras, you'll be very sensitive to it. Here you have Chiron in Aries, again sitting there. It's coming back to the sensitivity process. Neptune in Pisces, a lot of sort of collective distortion and illusion and oversensitivity. And what is occurring with these symbolisms is bringing to the surface both sides of the damagedness that occurred in a structural society that essentially was oppressive to both. And as I said, what I perceive subjectively and in my own perception is that both sides are wounded. And that the only way to actually heal that is to not actually identify with each side, polarization, the polarization of reality through pointing fingers, but the reclaiming of what was wounded inside of yourself. So, and tying the separation, the illusion of separation, and processing through the rage, processing through the anger. So this comes down to more individual things. So like what I see here with Saturn going direct is our ability to begin to inwardly contemplate and focus on our own center, and to only focus on that process to come back to what's viscerally real inside of ourselves, so that we're not actually in a place of being influenced by ideologies, as an example, with agendas that are influenced by deeper wounds, as in, so there's wounds that are taking place that then that can't be owned, and so that becomes a projection into the world stage, and that projection gets held within that there, and we buy into that, and so we become sort of possessed by the the resonance of other people's pain versus the healing of our internal pain within ourselves. And when we do that, it catalyzes us into this dynamic of truth, which is the realization of unity. And that's what the ultimate ideal I see and perceive with the Neptune here is. It's really trying to cut through the illusions of separation and unify the awareness of ourselves to the God consciousness within inside of ourselves. And that can only be done through turning inward and focusing on the self and identifying what triggers you and identifying where you will get sensitive or oversensitive or wounded in that way, and then bring that energy back to yourself. So you're reclaiming your own sovereignty and coming back to your own lighthouse so that you can then look at reality in the sense that in the way that it is, and observe that anything outside of yourself is literally the projection field of the magnitude of the collective perception. And in that sense, we're able to feel more grounded in our navigation. And so then we become the lighthouse that is stable, allowing the boats to come to safety during the storm, as it were. And that's kind of my message with today's conversation, and kind of bringing us back to that place of centeredness within inside of ourselves, and the realization that the work that it is that we have at the moment to mutate our inner psychological nature is to come back to the thing that we are viscerally feeling in our bodies, Uranus and Taurus, and realize what we have inherited, and realize that individually we have something to transmute in ourselves, so that then becomes the thing that we offer to the world in a purity sense. So it's not like our perceptions are skewed or in that way, because we'll just add to the polarization. If we add to the polarization, we create the divide and conquer, and what we do is we perceive and reinforce to ourselves that the very nature of what separates us is other people. And in that way, you can draw healthy boundaries. And so let me show you what I mean by this. You draw healthy boundaries because you notice inside of yourself what you have cleaned, and what is outside of yourself that is not cleaned, you can say, this is not okay for me. And so you draw the boundary with yourself, and you reclaim your ground. And so in that sense, it like feeds back the person's perception of their own need to clean themselves. And in that way, that's how we help. Okay. All right, my friends, thanks very much for listening to me sort of go on a bit of a rant over here. I've been spending a lot, like the week, just really contemplating the context of what I wanted to share with you. I hope that you got some value from this. I really hope that if it has brought something to you today and you want to share it in the comments, please do so. I like reading it. I like interacting with you guys over there. It brings me a great amount of joy. Okay. And the final thing I want to let you know is that I'm at my desk 24/7 doing consultations and readings for people, helping them understand what their storyline is about. So if you're interested in working with me, there's a link in the description to book readings with myself. And that's it. All right, people, have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.